Great. Well, for everyone coming in, welcome. If you want to turn your video cameras off, that's fine. It's up to you, but you might not want to see yourself during this program, so we can focus on Paula and Charlotte. So just go ahead and click on the video camera. There's an option to stop video at the bottom of your screens. I do want to let you know we will be recording, so if you don't want to be recorded during this on camera, you should go ahead and turn your video cameras off, and you're all muted. So thank you so much for joining us. My name is Sari. I'm the Public Programs Manager at MOFAD. This is wonderful to be with you all. We are just beginning our online programming series with Gastro, Obscura, and we'll hear from them in a moment. It's really exciting to be able to connect with people all over the country, potentially all over the world. I know last week we had people from Japan, we had people from Australia, and it made us realize that it is really important to still find ways to be connected online. Even if we can't be together in the same room, it's still wonderful to be in community with everyone. So like I said, we are partnering with Gastro Obscura. This is our second event in that series. We do programs every Sunday night at this time. So thank you so much for joining us. For those of you who are celebrating, happy Mother's Day. Thank you for including us in your Mother's Day celebration. And for all the moms out there, including mine and Paula's and Charlotte's, we're so happy to see you. So I did tell you we're recording. I also want to let you know there's going to be time for questions and answers, Q&A, at the end of this program. So Charlotte and Paula are going to talk for about 45 minutes. Your chat function right now at the bottom of your screen is disabled, but it's going to come back on after their conversation's over, and that's how we're going to do our Q&A. You're going to be able to chat questions in the little box, and then I'll read your questions for Paula and Charlotte. So if you have questions that come up during the talk, just write them down or make a mental note and then make sure you remember them for the end of the talk. So I'm going to quickly pass the mic over to my colleague Lisa from Gastro Obscura, and she's going to tell you a little bit about Gastro Obscura.
Hi everyone, I'm Lisa Gross. I am the Director of Strategy and Partnerships for Gastro Obscura. And this online experience is a collaboration between Gastro Obscura and MOFAD, and Gastro Obscura's mission is to inspire wonder and curiosity about the world through food and drink. Gastro Obscura's articles, videos, and guides explore what food and drink reveal about the places where they're made and the people who make them. And in partnership with chefs, historians, and other experts, Gastro Obscura helps travelers and curious people experience culinary wonders firsthand. And Gastro Obscura is part of the larger website atlasobscura.com. And so if you're not familiar with us, I feel like anyone who's into MOFAD will be into Gastro Obscura, and we're just so excited about this partnership. And thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. And I am going to send everyone an email tomorrow after the event, and it's going to give you an option to sign up for the Gastro Obscura newsletter and also to sign up for the MOFAD newsletter. So if you're not signed up for either of those, definitely take that opportunity to sign up, because we both send emails every week and we let you know all the different awesome programs that we are doing right now. So you are going to want to know about that. So I am now going to just introduce you to our wonderful panelists, Charlotte and Paula, and then turn it over to them. So we'll start with Paula. She is a freelance writer. She's a cookbook critic, and she's an author. She is the editor of the best cookbook newsletter of all time, Stain Page News. I'm also going to send you the link so you can sign up for that tomorrow. It's the best. Like you need to sign up immediately. She's the author of the Austin Cookbook, Recipes and Stories from Deep in the Heart of Texas. She lives in Austin, Texas. And, it's just an honor to be with her because she is one of the absolute cookbook authorities in the United States. And we have, of course, Charlotte Druckman, the author of Kitchen Remix. She is a journalist and a food writer. She conceived and edited the newly James Beard Award nominated collection, Woman on Food, a must-get. She's the author of Skirt Steak, Women Chefs on Standing the Heat and Staying in the Kitchen. And she's written 2 cookbooks in addition to Kitchen Remix, Stir, Sizzle, Bake, Recipes for Your Cast Iron Skillet, Oh, and Kitchen Remix, which is 75 recipes for making the most of your ingredients. And she's the creator of Food 52's Tournament of Cookbooks, AKA The Piglet. So with that, I am so happy to turn it over to Paula and Charlotte, and I'll see you in about 45 minutes for Q&A.
All right, well, Charlotte, I want to start by talking about your book, Kitchen Remix. And I was hoping we could start by talking about what the concept of the book is and why it sort of lends itself to this conversation about cooking in times of hardship.
Well, I should say that when I conceived of it, I was thinking less about the hardship factor, or, and more about the issue of people not knowing how to cook and not being tied up with not wanting to cook out of lack of confidence or fear. And then at the same time, this really weird dichotomy between our obsession with food as in terms of food culture. So I just could think of, and it started with my brother, but he's one of many. I could think of so many people who were really adventurous eaters at restaurants. They were really interested in what was happening with restaurant culture. They were intrepid about going to places that were far afield and trying cuisines they hadn't before and tracking down foods they had never tasted before. But if you asked them about their cooking, it was like a total disconnect. And I just thought, I talked to Nigella Lawson about this when I interviewed her about the anniversary of her first cookbook, How to Eat, which I think is still like a watershed must-have cookbook. And she kept stressing this idea that it's really important that we all know how to feed ourselves, that it's really important that we know how to cook. And I think that that's true. I think for a lot of people, it's not even a choice. And I think that's what we're seeing now. People just have to figure it out and they have to cook. But either way, whether it's a choice or not, it's like, how do you get people to feel comfortable doing it and to want to do it? And for me, it was, how do you bridge that gap between people who so obviously love food, love flavor, want to try all this stuff, but just feel terrified about cooking? And I think part of it might just be my personality. I like systems and I like constraints. I think they make me more creative, but I also felt like the missing link in a lot of cookbooks and just in this whole thing, aside from confidence, was resourcefulness. And it was sort of like how, and this really comes in now, I think, most of all, how do you teach people to be resourceful? And that can be about being economical and thrifty, but it can also be about not getting bored, which I think is a really big issue now. It's like, you make a pot of beans and it's like the pot of beans, just like beans every night, like, I don't know if that's a motivation for people to cook the pot of beans. Personally, for me, I'd be like, I better have a lot of things to do with these beans. I'm going to go in the kitchen and make beans. So that was really a part of it for me. It was like, how do you teach people to be resourceful? Maybe if you show them that when they have a chicken breast in front of them, there are so many different things they can do with it. And that applies not just to the spices you use, but to the actual technique. Something I've been thinking about a lot is we have all these viral recipes, and I think what they do is they stress that one thing, that one recipe. So it's like the chicken. So you maybe show someone how to roast a chicken in a particular way, but it's like, okay, you can't just keep having the same roast chicken over and over. So yeah, this was about, let's see if you take that ingredient and you show people how they can do multiple things with it and how they can combine it with other things. And that was how I came up with the structure of the book. And that was why I wanted to do it this way.
I think you're really right that there is this impulse for people to see cookbooks as a collection of recipes, right? And I think that a little bit the viral recipe thing feeds that. It's not of the viral recipes, it's that people have this like, I just want to be able to make this one dish and do it exactly the right way, when actually, if you're cooking for yourself meal after meal after meal after meal, it has to be a system. It can't be an isolated recipe. And so that's, I think, what for me is really interesting about your book is that it teaches people how to think in terms of a system and not just individual recipes.
Yeah, thanks. And I think, or I hope it does that too, without leaving people bored. Because for me, boredom is just the worst thing in the world. So I think that's the struggle. I think sometimes these systems can be great. They can be really orderly and tidy and well presented, but they might not inspire you, or they might not have the variation that you're looking for, in your diet.
So now that we have this idea of a cookbook is not just a collection of recipes, it's a way of thinking about approaching your kitchen, a way of, an attitude, perhaps, a confidence, whatever you would like to call it. How does that then speak to our times right now? Like what qualities are we looking for in that approach to the kitchen? You said resourcefulness.
Yeah, and I think definitely a sense of thrift. I think that's really important. And a sense of kind of, which I'm not necessarily the best at, but also kind of portion too. I think this idea of like, how much of this thing do I need to buy? And then how much, once I've bought it, am I going to use to get the most out of it? I think that's also part of it. I think the shopping aspect, which my book doesn't deal with that much, although it makes easier because it's like if you just buy the 3 ingredients, you're kind of, you can just build from there. But I think the shopping is actually something that needs to be addressed separately. I have a very hard time figuring out like exactly how much I need if I'm going to do my groceries every 2 weeks. I think that's a big part of it. I think this is, again, a really hard thing to sort of quantify or even qualify verbally, but a certain kind of imagination, so that if you don't have the thing that you want at the grocery store and you get something else, instead of feeling defeated, you feel like there's maybe something else you could do with it that you hadn't thought of. I think that's also a really, I don't know what else you think. There may be some other things that you think are essential.
Yeah, I mean, I think a thing that I have struggled with, because, we are cookbook authors, critics, etc., but I'm not perfect at pandemic cooking by any stretch of the imagination, is that when this first started, I was making food in these huge batches. And on the weekends, I was like, well, I don't have anything to do but cook, so I'm just going to make this giant batch of whatever. And I'm sort of learning to rein it back in order to, not get sick of the food that I have. And
it goes back to the portion thing, because I also think we were being told, like that was a thing that we're part of the problem. We were telling people, we were being told to do all this batch cooking. Because I am quarantined alone, I was a little bit skeptical of it early on, because I was just like, but what am I, one person going to do with all that stuff? And then if I have that many leftovers, like I don't have that much room in my freezer. It became almost like when you're trying to figure out how to pack a suitcase, like that. But this is what I mean, this sort of portion thing I think is very difficult. And I think most recipes right now that are being sort of put out there for pantry friendly and quarantine friendly cooking, they tend to sort of be for 4 people. And you kind of have to be mindful of that if you are not 4 people when you decide if you're going to make them and how much of them you're going to make.
Yeah, how much mac and cheese can I really eat in 1 week?
Yeah. And you're allowed to say that. Like, I think you're allowed to say, I don't want to eat that much mac and cheese, as long as there's some other things you could be making.
Right. And that's, again, comes back to your book, which is, okay, I have mac, I have the cheese, I have another thing. What are 3 different things that I can do with that?
Yeah.
So when we're talking about these cookbooks that look at how to think about cooking, do you have other books that you like for that topic?
Yeah, I noticed, it's interesting, I noticed in the last actually like the last 2 years that people have put out books that feel more sort of, if they're not systems, like they're on their way to being systems, that I really like. I really feel like I keep saying that I like his cookbook and he's going to start thinking that it's like creepy, but I think Lucas Bulger's Start Simple is like such an excellent book for our just for this time. First of all, it really does speak to people who are new to cooking. Yeah. But it does this thing where it's not just about an ingredient necessarily. It can be about doing one thing to that ingredient and then having like 5 things you can do once you've prepared it. Like he does these marinated cooked greens. And then they're like a whole set of things you can do with your greens. Or like a sweet potato. And sometimes it's about multiple things to do to the ingredient. And sometimes it's literally just, I'm going to show you one technique with this thing. And then you can do like 10 different like breakfasts with it. And I think it's really smart. And I kind of think it gets at that same idea. A less obvious one because it was written for group cooking, but I think you can take some lessons from it. Paul Kahan's Cooking for Good Times. It's like a similar thing because he's like, here's how you roast a pork shoulder. Now, once you have the pork shoulder, here are like 5 different meals that you could make with this pork shoulder. So again, I feel like it's sort of like a system. And if you are cooking in bulk, it's great because it's like, oh, great, I can make this thing last, but I also now know how to do this one thing well, but where the focus is not the recipe. It's just like the base, and then you build on it. Again, too, I think Aberbaron's Roughage, I really like how she organized that book.
I have it on my desk right now to talk about.
It's by vegetable, but even within each chapter on each vegetable, she brings a lot of the same ingredients back again, I noticed. So again, it feels kind of like a self-contained ecosystem of recipes that you can make with a limited range of things, but where you're really, really pushing how much you get out of it. And then also shows you multiple techniques for the same ingredient, which obviously I'm really into. So those, and then it's a little bit more fun, but again, it just came out. So I'm just thinking in terms of like books that are all kind of thinking this way. Actually, I had two of them. One, it was a small book, but it's Christy Mooji's Salad Party. It was done like a flip book. So you could like pick a leaf, pick some things you put in the salad, pick a dressing, and you could just keep rearranging them. And again, I was like, this is great because it just shows people that salads are essentially just a constant recombining of ingredients that you like, and that's it. And I thought that was really smart. And then the last one I was thinking, which just came out, is Ned Baldwin's How to Dress an Egg. Because I think similar to the sort of Paul Kahan thing, it's very technique based, but then it shows you like a whole bunch of different things and different ways to apply those techniques. And again, it's organized by ingredient. That seems to be one of the sort of, I don't know. I'm curious to know what you think. I'm actually curious to know what you think about the books that are organized by technique and if you think they're as effective.
I think books that are organized by technique are sometimes helpful. I do get on kicks, right? Like where I will be really into braises, or I'll be really into grilling, or every summer I hit like a succotash patch where I just, it's like corn and cherry tomatoes and then whatever other vegetables I have on hand, saute every night. But I think you're right. I'm more drawn to the ingredient stuff because I think that that's how so many of us shop these days. I have a farm box delivery I started getting in the past couple of months, and it shows up and I don't know what's going to be in it. And, these ingredient books like Roughage, 6 Seasons is another one that I am also a total fangirl of.
Honestly, I want to say it's a perfect cookbook.
It's a really good cookbook. And okay, so here's the thing I love about 6 Seasons, which is a book I've talked about ad nauseum, but it explains the basics, right? Like you get okra, he doesn't write about okra in that book actually, you get eggplant, you get kale, and what are the basic things you can do with it? How do you steam it? How do you saute it? Can you freeze it? And then application recipes, right? So how are we using this ingredient? But then if you cook out of it enough, and roughage also is this way, you start to see the same theories applied to different ingredients over and over again. And then the light bulb goes off and you're like, oh, I can do this. I can fold in farro. I can top with herb vinaigrette, whatever, for almost anything. And that's when you start to get it.
Yeah, he's so good, I think, at texture building in that sense, but without necessarily telling you that's what he's doing. But it's like the thing that you're registering, like when you eat, you're like, this is so good. There's everything I want in it.
Right, and often in one pot meals, not one pot, but like one dish is everything you need in it.
I'm really into, this is like, it's not why it's a great cookbook, but just like, I like to add, I'm really into all of his condiments, like the way he thinks about like dressings and pestos and stuff. They're just better than almost anyone else's. It's almost annoying. And again, you can use them on anything, but yeah, I love 6 seasons.
Yeah, it's great. I don't know. I think that all of these things that we're talking about sort of fall into the category of things chefs just do and don't know that home cooks don't know how to do those, or that it doesn't occur to home cooks to do those things.
I think the ones that are really good are the ones where the chefs realize the home cooks don't know, and so they write it accordingly. I think when they write the cookbook taking for granted the fact that home cooks don't know, that's where we have that's where the problem is. But I think the ones who are attuned to that, and I feel that about 6 seasons, I feel like he's kind of saying, look, if you just made this one small effort, this one thing differently, it would change everything. And then it does. And it doesn't feel so daunting. It really does, in most cases, feel like a small step that was added. And like suddenly things became more delicious.
Right. Like if you bother to put the thyme in the simmering water, if you bother to toast the grains, if you all of these things that are just like 3 minutes more.
Yeah. But they're not crazy. That's
right.
I feel like there's a certain mindfulness in that that I really appreciate. And I can't say that for most chef cookbooks. So like when you see it in a chef's cookbook, I always feel like a sense of deep appreciation.
For sure. Because I think that for most chefs, things, they think that everyone thinks like this.
Yeah, like it's the most normal thing in the world.
Right. And then
why when you watch now, when you watch their videos where chefs are like, I'm just gonna cook from home. And some of them get it. Some of them are like totally getting it and they're like, this is legit quarantine cooking and I love watching their videos. And some of them are just like, oh come on. And like they happen to have some like special gadget in their cupboard that they bust out. Like, it's no big deal. This is how I cook at home. Yeah.
Yeah, no.
Or like you're still chopping things like so fast that if you're watching it, you're like, I can't.
No, absolutely not. Okay, let's see. What's next on my list? So this is not the first period of hardship cooking, let's call it, that humans have experienced since, the modern cookbook era. Do we want to talk about some examples of cookbooks from the past that, touched on hardship cooking, whether it was during wartime or depressions or...
One of the things that occurred to me, it's occurred to me before part of it, which is just that we seem to have this thing in contemporary cookbook writing and also food writing that we don't talk about budget. That things that are cheap, and cheap isn't even the right word, this idea of value or economy or thrift, like that these are bad things. Like that you don't mention that in a cookbook. And that had occurred to me. And then I was looking back, I looked at, obviously, I feel like we have to hold it up because it's like the touchstone. MFK, How to Cook a Wolf.
I got mine.
Yeah. Like, but I was looking at it and I was looking at how sort of unabashed she was about recommending being economical, about how that was like a real thing. And she sort of talks about it happening after World War I when she first wrote this, and how people were proud of it. The sense that I get from this is that people were proud of being able to spend so little and still cook things that were delicious. And if you look at cookbooks that came out in the US, again, sort of like after World War I and basically up until about, I think like the 1930s, you see that there were like, everything was about, I mean, it's funny, it's like there's a reason economics is in the name of home economics. It was like the period where home ec developed. And it's really about like how thrifty can you be? And you see ads for cheap meat where the point is, you guys, like all the stuff you can do with this and it only costs this much and it's so great, and people sort of wanting to get it, not being ashamed. And that's so interesting to me because I feel like we don't, I wonder if we will maybe because of this, but it's something that really gets left out of the equation now. I also brought, I found this when I was in Paris, like it's at least over a decade ago. It's a cookbook called Cuisine de Guerre, meaning it's like basically a cuisine, like cooking, wartime cooking. And it's recipes that are 150% of economy after, I love this, after serious experiences. So it's basically like after you've endured wartime or trauma, some things you can cook. So it has like rations in mind, and it's, you know, and this came out in 1917 and it was reissued. And again, it's like, the whole point is that you're not spending money, you know, and again, it's presented as something very normal and something that you're trying to achieve no matter who you are. And yeah, so I don't know, this has really struck me. I'm now stuck on it because I'm wondering how we bring that back, you know, how you re-educate people. And again, it's that difference between cheap and what value means. Obviously cheap isn't good, but something that's inexpensive, but the ratio of value to cost is right. Like that's something that we should be figuring out better or presenting better, I think.
Yeah, I think that for me, what needs to happen in cookbooks right now is that there needs to be an appreciation for the money that I am spending goes as far as possible. Like, am I buying this, I don't know, fancy cured meat for a pasta? Is that worth it? How is that balanced by the cost of the other ingredients? Can I use it in 17 different things?
Yeah. And I think it's hard in a culture that promotes conspicuous consumption in both senses of the word to get there, you know, to get to a point where there would be pride taken in that, look how little I spent and look at how great this thing I made is.
Mm-hmm. And I think that, like, I think food media, both recipe development in publications and cookbooks, is coming out of a period where cheap meant unhealthy. It meant convenience foods. It meant things in boxes and cans and frozen, and we all had chips on our shoulders about that kind of stuff. I don't, like, how do we balance those things? How do we balance the people who are obsessed with, you know, farm fresh whatever and the other thing?
It's really hard because we've also put such a stigma on the stuff that's boxed, which again, it's because it's inexpensive and it's like we're trying to make people feel bad. And we've pigeonholed all the farm fresh stuff as expensive, which is, again, it becomes almost like a status symbol. And it's just, I think the idea that these things should be status symbols at all is like part of the problem. And I don't know, I think one thing, I don't know, this is just occurring to me now, but you know how certain publications, actually the Washington Post does this, they tell you the nutritional count, like for all of their recipes, they include calories and like they break it down. Maybe it would also be fun to see the costs of something broken down where you saw the ingredients sort of average price, just to make people start to be mindful of that. I don't know if we'll ever get there. I mean, we can't even get people to give us weights in baking recipes, so I'm not holding out hope for the extra amount of work that would take, but I think that would actually be like an interesting experiment to see like how much each ingredient and like ultimately how much each person's portion had cost.
Yeah. Absolutely. And it's hard because it's relative across regions and all of these things, but yeah. So why don't we talk about some foods and cuisines that do well with this idea of resourcefulness, thriftiness? What are dishes that people have in the past turned to in times of hardship?
Well, the one that I sort of like, it's funny because now I think everyone would be like, beans, beans. But I was writing an article about banana bread a few years ago before it was trending. And I learned that banana bread was actually considered a symbol of, again, being thrifty. It was that, and it was again right after, I want to say, right after actually World War II, I think. It could be wrong on this timing. That, and actually it may have been the First World War, but anyway, baking soda and baking powder had just become widely available and were also inexpensive. So you had these leaveners that were really easy to find, didn't cost very much, and skipped the step of doing hello, sourdough starter, etc., or even needing yeast. And there seemed to be, as there kind of always seems to be, a glut of bananas. Like, we always seem to have bananas lying around, and people were really proud of the fact that they had found something to do with their old bananas. And this is how banana bread was born. So it's funny to me now that we're glamorizing it without the context of the fact that, like, it's actually one of the most appropriate things we could be making, because it is actually like a really high value, low cost proposition. So I think about that. And then it's funny because I think, for me, this is me personally, I find Indian cuisine really, really, for these times, useful and something I go back to a lot, just because it tends to be more grain and vegetable heavy, but also the sort of most of the work is done by the spices. Which, they last a really long time. They don't take up a lot of room. And you can do so much with that. And, like, you think of something like dal, like a dish like dal. I mean, I guess we could blow this up and say porridge. Porridge is one of those dishes, and people tend to find it comforting. You also see people making a lot of congee now, I've noticed too.
Risottos.
Yeah, but I think there's the comforting aspect of it, but it's also that we're using grains, which last a long time, tend to be less expensive than something like meat, which we're now seeing shortages of. And then most of what's making them delicious, and they're often cooked like dal's cooked in water. You don't even need stock. And it's just, being smart about making your spices work for you. That's really like what's making everything so delicious. So that's something that I found. I don't know, what are some that you think are?
I am on a constant quest right now to figure out what to do with stock, because I have been freezing all of my vegetable scraps, anything that, cheese rinds, anything that might be tasty, and making a weekly stock out of whatever it was. I'm a little nervous here in Austin. It's about to be too hot for most of the stock-based dishes. But lots of soups, lots of congee, lots of risottos, lots of that kind of thing. I was looking at my bookshelf, trying to figure out what books we should talk about during this talk. And one of my earliest cookbook collecting habits was, I was really interested in like early international cookbooks. Just books that people wrote when they moved to a new country, or books that people wrote after they had visited a country. And I think that there is a lot to learn from the immigrant experience for cooking right now, just figuring out what of the ingredients that you have will most closely approximate the thing you would like to make. So that's something I'm thinking about a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, again, and that's resourcefulness, like so much, especially I feel like in this country, a lot of the sort of American immigrant cuisines that only emerged because of lack of the same ingredients, and then people being really creative.
Yeah, and
cuisines.
Yeah, and folding in local ingredients to their traditions that they brought with them, and that kind of thing. For sure. All right, let's see what's next on my list. Do we want to talk about, I have this on my question list, and I'm not sure if you'll have any ideas, but a thing that I've noted that has come out of these periods that are difficult to cook through is that there are dishes that come out of them. Do you have any ideas of the dishes that will come out of this current period?
So I definitely think bean cooking is going to come out. I mean, I think a lot of people were not taking beans very seriously, and specifically this idea that you would get dried beans and do that work of like making the pot of beans. And just the fact that Joe Yonin's book has been so successful. I mean, I think we're going to see people using beans more probably after this, but I don't know if there will be a bean dish. You know, I think there will be a bunch of bean dishes. And it's like Tejal did a really beautiful rajma, I think, dish, which is kind of, it's like an Indian bean dish that's cooked with cream. And she just did that like last week for the New York Times. So now you're seeing a bunch of people making that. And then of course we have, I don't even want to bring this up, but the stew, we have Alison Roman's chickpea dish. And like, that's essentially also like, you're basically working with beans. In her case, she's using, I think, canned beans, but you could do that from scratch. So I don't know which of the specific bean dishes will come out of this, but I definitely think beans. I don't know, like, I think it's funny. I'm not sure it'll be specific dishes or if it'll just be people cooking more with ingredients. What's hard is that we already had this culture of viral recipes, and it was already happening. So it's really hard to figure out whether a recipe is trending because of the circumstances that we're living in, or if it's just someone was really good at like getting the recipe in the right place at the right time and then it went viral. Like, it's actually, I think it's really hard to know.
Mm-hmm. I totally agree. I'm also really curious how things will change over the summer, right? Because like this happened when it was hardcore cooking weather. Everyone was like, okay, I'm gonna stay home. I'm gonna be cozy. I'm gonna make my beans. But like, what's gonna happen when it's in the 90s?
Yeah.
You know?
Oh no, I think the challenge there, and it depends, right? Because it depends like with how states deal with pause, and then if they go back into quarantine. Well, let's just say it's summer and you're back in quarantine. Your ability to get a lot of that fresh produce that you look forward to in summer is probably going to be curtailed to some extent, you know? And so then, which is like, it's really sad. It's like you might actually be pulling the like winter bean things, I know, out of the fridge, or like some huge slab of lasagna and eating that because you couldn't get your, like, what if you can't, I don't want to jinx this, but like, what if you can't make your succotash? Like, we don't know. And so, yeah, I think it's funny because it's like, I think if we do have the ability to have access to those ingredients, there's going to be almost like a glut. Like, we're just going to be so happy. Like, I know I would be so happy to see the tomatoes, you know, happier than usual just because of the past few months. But I'm also like, I don't know what we'll actually get.
I'm very curious to see if people start canning.
I know. Oh, that's such a good point. I am too. Again, it's like if we can get people, I keep having conversations with people who don't really know how to cook and they're asking me questions about sourdough starter. And I'm like, listen, I don't do it myself. I tried, I got bored. I had a starter and then I proceeded to just let it die. I never actually baked anything with it. And I now have in my possession a dried version of a starter that I keep thinking maybe now is the time for me to try again. I haven't done it. But people keep being like, okay, what should I do? And I just say to them, have you ever in your life baked bread before? And no, they haven't. And my response to this is, why don't you just try doing like Jim Leahy's no knead bread with commercial yeast? Because you know what, it's delicious, but also it's to go from zero to natural sourdough. Are you kidding me? So that, I wonder similarly with the canning, it's like people need a certain level, I think, of an ease with cooking and a regularity of cooking before they start messing with canning. This is just my theory. So I would like to see that happen. but I'm not sure. It may be the same people who get really into the sourdough starter, where it's sort of like a trendy cult thing, but it's not like a legit enduring practice. We'll see.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of stuff that you can freeze, you can can, or you can freeze, right? So you could like freeze your tomato sauce.
I do that. I'm not into the whole sterilizing the thing. And again, because I'm not going to it, like how much am I going to make? So I would prefer to make like a freezer batch of jam, because it's enough jam that then it's,
Yeah, you have a little for now, a little for later.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. What is next on my list? Oh, let's talk about the relativity of who has what, and how it's different across the US. A thing that has really struck me is that I don't have a really easy time finding eggs, and I have found that a lot of the sort of quarantine cooking recipes are extremely egg heavy.
Yes. And I'm hearing this a lot in New York. It's so hard. It's so ironic that media is so like New York centric, because the New York City experience is always going to be its own beast, and not like so. I'm finding eggs like pretty available here, although I know my mom was just complaining because she likes to get, which I disagree with this. Most recipes call for large eggs as the standard, but my mom seems to like having extra large eggs around, and she could not find extra large eggs. And she lives on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. So it could be like something that's really widespread. I'm noticing from talking to people in other parts of the country, they seem also much more, I talked to someone in Dubuque, Iowa, and he was much more concerned with the meat shortage, which again, in New York City, I don't really feel affected by in the same way. And again, I think that's because we have so many more kind of like bougie outlets to buy things. So for us, if you've already been buying local farm-raised stuff, that's still available. It's more expensive and it's special. But I think on the level of like the more sort of mass-produced grocery store chains, that's where you really see the stuff that's missing. Like again, flour. I couldn't get my King Arthur flour, and one of my friends said, "Oh, there's this small mill in Maine. It's called Maine Grains, and they're still producing." And I was like, "Okay, it's lucky for me that I can order these specialty grains from Maine Grains." But like, yeah, your average person could not get flour. That's real. Mm-hmm. So, and I think the other thing is, it's like no one would have predicted. Like I don't think we would have predicted like the bean thing, for example, or even the meat shortage. Again, because we've been in the media so focused lately on trying to talk about less meat, that like when I heard there was a meat shortage, I was almost like, what do you mean you're not vegetable forward cooking, everybody? But like, of course they're not, Yeah, and then the question is, does that change the way people cook? Like, will people finally cook more vegetables, or will they be now just using Spam?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I found myself using significantly more frozen vegetables than I used to.
I realize I like some frozen vegetables. Like, I love frozen peas. Mm-hmm. I actually really like frozen spinach. A lot of times I almost find it easier with certain recipes, if you're cooking something into something, to have frozen spinach. So I kind of was like, great. I'm just going to get more of this stuff because I already liked it. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I believe we are being asked to pivot to the Q&A section. So.
Yeah, cool. Well, thank you both so much. So everyone, you have a chat box at the bottom of your screen. So if you have questions for Paula and Charlotte, you can just go ahead and type them there and we will get them. So I just want to remind you that all of the books that were mentioned in this fantastic talk, I was jotting them down, so I will make sure to send them to you in a follow-up email tomorrow. And once again, I will remind you to sign up for Paula's cookbook newsletter, because now you get it. Now you know she's the best, as is Charlotte, and of course by Kitchen Remix. And of course, sign up for the MOFAD newsletter and sign up for the Gastro Obscura newsletter. So I'll send you an email with like 10 different things that you're supposed to do. And I guess while we're waiting for people to start chatting their questions, I have a question. You were talking so much about cookbooks, but I am curious, what is the first restaurant meal you're looking forward to eating once, I don't know, restaurants reopen, or who knows what it'll be like, but what's the restaurant meal that you're both dreaming about?
I can answer this because I've thought about it, and when I thought about it, I imagined myself crying. I mean, I like actually get emotional about it, but it's funny. At first, for the first few weeks of this, I thought I really miss the Restaurant King in New York City, and I do. I miss it a lot. But the restaurant that I realized I wanted to go back to, and I want to go with my parents. I want to go to Isodi in the West Village, and I just want to have the chicken cooked under a brick and the cacio e pepe, the spaghetti cacio e pepe, like just so simple but so perfect. And I really do. I think I would cry just to be so grateful, you know, to sit in that room and just to be taken care of and to have that food cooked by someone else so well and just the way I remember it. Like, I just think that would be my meal.
Yeah. And for everyone not in New York, it's an Italian restaurant. It's
sorry, yeah.
And I should say, as you're thinking about your questions, I would also love to hear where you're from. So if you could also send us a chat, because assuming a lot of you are not from New York, and maybe some of you are not even from the United States, let us know. We want to hear about that too. So Paula, what are you dreaming about eating?
So for me, the answer to this question is definitely about being able to be with people, because you know, I can get takeout from restaurants right now and that kind of thing, but it's not the same. So my answer would probably be, well, first of all, I have a dive bar here in Austin that I go to once a week with my girlfriends, that we obviously have not been going to, but Posse East, we will be back. But then something like Korean barbecue, I think, those meals that are just about being physically in the place that you really can't recreate. Going to like a really good sushi bar, omakase, like the Uchi really here in Austin.
Really good sushi.
Really good sushi.
Like, yeah, not takeout, like where it's, yeah.
Yeah.
Special.
Like
yeah.
where someone hands it to you over the thing, and
yeah. Absolutely. Okay, we have a couple comments and questions coming in. So first, well, I guess this isn't a question, but it's a comment from Abby. Charlotte, your enthusiasm made my day. And Paula, I love your breakfast picture.
Oh.
Behind you. Yes, I've been admiring that as well.
That was from there was like a James Beard Media Awards party that they handed those out like 8 years ago.
Yeah. Okay, this is from Stacy. For Charlotte, there are many online resources for estimating the calculated cost of ingredients for commercial concerns, but for consumers, this one may be helpful. Oh, sorry. Okay, this is not a question.
But that's still good to know.
Yeah, so she has a link. So thank you, Stacy. That's great, and maybe we'll also include that in the follow-up email.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's really good. This is from Brienne. What do you think are the healthiest, most versatile canned goods or box things to cook with besides beans?
I have been like the number one I don't know, does this count freezer stuff? But the thing that I have been going to a ton is sliced frozen okra, because you can just put it on a sheet pan with like chicken thighs and roast it real hot, and it gets crispy and nice. That's been my like number one discovery of this time, is I love frozen okra.
I'm all about, and I feel like everyone has already said this, but this was how I ate before, but all the sort of like the tin fish, like sardines, they're so good for you. And I think they're so delicious. Or even just honestly like canned tuna. That stuff goes a really long way, and it's pretty healthy. And again, when you're dealing with things like sardines and anchovies, which I also happen to love, like when you're dealing with the small fish, the bottom feeders, you're doing more to support the environment, you know, than when you're eating the bigger, sort of more prestige prey fish. So it's also, you know, you can feel good about health, but also the health of the environment.
Yeah. Absolutely. I could not agree more as a big tin fish proponent. But this is really exciting. We have people here from Asheville, North Carolina, from Madison, Wisconsin, from Columbus, Ohio. This is so great. This is why we're doing this. Because we know, we do the MOFAD programs in New York, and it's just it gives me all the warm and fuzzies that there's people from all over who are coming to our programs now. So maybe we'll just always keep doing this forever. Okay, this is from Suzanne. Not really a question, but I was interested in the conversation regarding simple, cheap, and expensive food. I have noticed that cookbooks that focus on that topic aren't really taken seriously, which I think does the authors and the public a disservice. From Atlanta. Thank you. This is very interesting. Agreed. Okay. For Charlotte, which chefs do you think have been doing quarantine cooking videos well?
Well, I completely love Dave Chang's quarantine videos because he really is, it's almost like he's in awe of what it's like to be quarantined and not having. So you're almost getting, he's almost like figuring out in real time what it's like for home cooks, but he also has this ability to kind of MacGyver things. And what I also like is that he'll say, in the restaurant, we would use this and this, but we don't have this. And he's not, the other thing is he's quarantining in someone else's home, which is why I think this is so effective. Because he doesn't have all the things that he would like to have, and he sort of doesn't know where things are. And so he has to be resourceful. And I find it really, really refreshing. He's probably the one chef who I watch the most. So I'm just like, how did he do that? And yeah, he sort of figured things out, and then in figuring those things out, he's imparted them. I think he's responsible for, people went through a phase of making scallion pancakes, and he kind of had to hack it because he didn't have everything he needed to do it the way he would like to do it. And he was still able to, bust them out in a way that I was like, I could do that right now. That's nothing.
Yeah.
So yeah, he's really, I also like, I wish she did demos, but I really like Missy Robbins, her Instagram, her stories. I'm like, well, she does a lot of really simple pastas, but she also tries to make things she hasn't made before. So today she attempted a Dutch baby pancake, and like it kind of didn't work, but you could tell it was still good, and she was like happy with it. So yeah, I think I like the chefs who are kind of figuring it out with us in real time.
Yeah.
Paula may also have some that she's been looking at.
I have not been watching. Sorry. I am a Missy Robbins fan though.
Okay. Yeah. I've also been watching the Jose Andres quarantine cooking ones a little bit because he cooks with his daughters, and he's so sweet and endearing. Okay. Sarah asks, with the advent of summer, how do you suggest we deal with an overabundance of perishable, non-freezable vegetables? I'm looking at home gardens or CSA boxes.
Well, this is where the canning really does come in. And if you're not canning, there's, now I'm going to forget the name of the person who wrote this book. What's wrong with you? But it's called The Homemade Pantry. Guys, look up The Homemade Pantry. And she kind of talks about how to freeze your own vegetables as opposed to buying frozen vegetables, which is something else aside from the canning thing that you can do. You also can make soups. And, there are certain soups that I like cold. People can disagree with me about this, but you could also, I think, I don't know, no one's ever said this, maybe it can't be done, but something I would like to try and do would be to take a soup where you make the base of it, and maybe right before you serve it, you add the chilled component to it. That might be a thing you can do. I'm not sure, I kind of just made it up. Also, things like, I know people say this a lot, but pestos are great, and you can freeze them, and you can put them in ice cube trays so that you have like the perfect portion of pesto when you need it. So there's that, but it is hard again. Now you get to a point where there's only so much jam you can make or stuff you can can. Pickle, don't forget pickling things also. Really good, really useful.
Yes.
Especially with summer vegetables, I love doing sofritos. Just cooking down bell peppers and onions and tomatoes and whatever, and you can freeze that really easily to be the base of a soup or a sauce or whatever. And then also food dehydrator. I bought one 2 years ago, and that has the added benefit of making everything smaller.
Great. Abby asks for both of you, what is your next project?
I have no idea. I
Getting out of quarantine.
yeah, I need some time to recover because I had this sort of unfortunate experience of having 2 books come out within 6 months of each other. And so I'm just trying now to just write a few stories. I actually just worked on a newsletter for the Washington Post, which will be, I think we're announcing it this week or next week. But like that work is kind of done. So in my mind, mentally, I do have to sort of like figure out what I want to do next. But I think this whole experience really, I don't know for you, Paula, but it really makes you rethink what kind of content you want to put out into the world. And so I think it's going to take me a while to feel that inspired and excited about a project where, for me, I always like to feel like I'm being of use, or I'm doing something that is useful or has some kind of value beyond just the fact that I wanted to write it, or it's nice to like put some content out into the world. And I just feel like now I really need to sit before I figure out what that would be so that it would actually be of use and of value. I don't know, Paula, what are you working on?
I'm busy, but I totally feel that when my book came out, I had to like stop for like 2 years. It's a lot. What am I doing? I just got a grant for my newsletter. So working on that. I have a couple book proposals working, and then I'm doing this thing on Instagram, which is not really for work, it's just for fun, where every weekend I'm drawing ingredients out of a hat and then making a casserole out of them.
I love it.
So I don't know, one's in the oven right now, so I'll let you know how that goes.
What is it?
So it is a tater tot casserole, so like a hot dish with tater tots on top, and then chicken, carrot, cream sauce with miso in it, and oregano.
All right, it can work.
I hope so. It's what's for dinner.
Actually, am I allowed to ask a question of Paula?
Yes.
This is something she and I kind of like mentioned, but we didn't get to talk about. And I'm thinking about this now as you're writing cookbook proposal. Have you pivoted in terms of like, I'm thinking, what are the cookbooks that people are gonna want after this? Like, how is this gonna change the cookbook market? Like, I'm worried that we're gonna have a whole bunch of cookbooks that come out this fall or next year that feel completely irrelevant in light of everything we've just been through, just because the way that publishing works, it's like it usually tends to take a good 2 years between the time that you get the green light and seal your proposal and then the time that the book comes out. So I think about this like, yeah, this 2-year lag. So when you're thinking about doing proposals now, Paula, like how are you thinking differently about them? Like have any of them changed because of this?
Okay. Well, one of them is with a chef. And that one has been in the works for a while and is like oddly well positioned for this. Without giving too much away, it's about like preserves and preserving and mostly what to do with preserved foods. So like you have a jar of sauerkraut, what do you do with it? And then the other one is just like it's just a weird, creative, fun, sort of self-indulgent personal project that I'm thinking about self-publishing, and that is very much like, well, if the world's ending, what do I want to do with my time? Something weird.
I'm ready for it.
Charlotte, your question to Paula actually was very similar to the last question that I'll read from our good friend Therese Nelson, who, by the way, is brilliant and on this.
Hi, Therese. Thank you.
And rocked our panel last week, and also curates the online website blackculinaryhistory.com. So I'm also including that in the newsletter.
He's amazing.
Yes. So very similar to what you just asked, Paula, Therese said, Charlotte, your book is super timely, but you certainly didn't have this moment in mind. So I'm wondering, because the timelines for cookbook is so long, if you feel there would be a proliferation of quarantine cookbooks, like you mentioned, post-war is on the way, or is the marketplace thinking past this moment? So I guess put your publishing cap on to kind of speak to this question.
I mean, yes, I'm an idealist, but I would like to see now being the time where you have more sort of economically minded cookbooks, because I do think that that's something I think we're about to hit a major recession. Some people are saying it's going to be like the Depression. So I think if you're thinking about that and how long it lasts, it would be smart for people to start thinking about, how do I do cookbooks that don't belittle not spending a lot of money? And, like, I would love to see, it's really hard, I think, for any food writer, a person in the food industry right now, to think about what restaurants are going to be, how many will be open, and what they look like. But if you're being really practical about it, the old style of having restaurant cookbooks or sort of chefy cookbooks, I don't see those doing that well in the future because they won't have the same anchors. I also think that we're going to be much more interested in less of the dining experience as, and I think Paula got to this, the people we're eating with, community. So I could see more like people who have done pop-ups, like pop-up kind of driven cookbooks. I actually could see things like those working. I could see things that are about feeding, bringing people together. I see that working. And then I also see, things where we're thinking about budget and where it's actually cool. Like, I would love, instead of seeing a chef do their Michelin cookbook, to see a chef come forward and be like, I want to do a really cool cookbook about spending like no money.
Yeah, the Michelin chefs are doing the quarantine cooking shows, like, do that.
Yeah, I would love it. And I think you don't have to use the word quarantine in it. I think it's more, again, just about like resourceful cooking. It's also, keeping in mind that we've just, I hope, gained a whole population of cooks that we didn't have before. So it's like, what do they need? And what can you do with them? And what can you do for them? And I think the other thing I hope we don't lose, I'm really scared, so I'd like to see this folded into cookbooks. I felt like we finally, at least from the media point of view, we had this really exciting, innovative generation of younger cooks who are coming in and really trying to, I hate the word disrupt, but they really were trying to disrupt the model of what a restaurant looked like. And a lot of those were small restaurants. They were community-driven restaurants. They also happened to be restaurants that were owned by people of color. And I'm scared that we're going to lose them because we have money either going to the mass chains or the fine dining guys, and we know that 1% can always still afford to dine. So I'd love to see any of those innovators. I'd love to see them have restaurants, but in addition to that, or instead of that, maybe them doing cookbooks so that we can keep that going in some way. I don't know. Again, that's very idealistic. That's not me predicting the market. That's me saying how I wish it looked. But yeah, Paula, I think, is more practical about this stuff.
Okay, so some things that I will say is, first of all, I have not noticed in news tracking of book deals any slowdown whatsoever. Like, publishers are still buying cookbooks at a clip. That's still happening. I have not seen anything about quarantine cooking. I have not seen a pivot to anything that could be called, I don't know. People have been working on their proposals for a while, right? So like the stuff that's selling right now, I don't think is specific to quarantine. I think that a lot of these skills, the economy, the thrift, the resourcefulness, flexibility, all of these things are good ideas anyway. So I guess my hope is that they are not pegged to this crisis specifically, but offer skills that are useful in this crisis and other times as well. And I think, you could be looking at having some real classics come out of that. If someone who's in their mid-20s writes like the definitive guide to feeding their family for $50 a week or whatever, like that could be a classic we're reading 100 years from now. That's what I got.
Cool. All right, I think we did it. I think we're at time. So I want to thank Charlotte and Paula so much. Yay! Virtual clapping. This was a really, really wonderful and so useful and timely conversation. So on behalf of MOFAD, thank you so much. And Lisa, you're muted, so I'll just say on behalf of Gastro as well. And thank you guys so much for tuning in and spending your evening with us. Just a reminder, we are going to be here every Sunday night. We have different programs scheduled for the next couple months. Next week is Cooking with Beer. We have a conversation with the authors of the book, The Beer Pantry. There's going to be beer, drinking, and demos, and it's going to be really, really fun. So everyone just please continue to stay safe. We're sending lots of good thoughts and love to you and your loved ones, and hopefully see you next week. So thank you, everyone. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paula.
Thank you, Charlotte.